In this capsule, we'll talk about different body indices. Body indices are calculated to find out the proportion of a particular body part in relation to the other part. Now, these indices have their importance in categorizing individuals into different categories. Now, we have certain indices which help us in discriminating even the races. We can identify the major races of the world, that is Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid. Now, this is despite the fact that these races have no longer been used, but the term ethnic group has been used for denoting races. So we can differentiate, for example, the Negroes can be differentiated from that of the Mongoloids, and the Mongoloids can be differentiated from that of the Caucasoids on the basis of these indices. There are certain other indices which can tell about the shape of the face or shape of the head or shape of the nose, like that. And we do have an index which talks about the total body proportion in relation to the weight of the body and the height of the body, through which we can categorize individuals into the undernourished or the overnourished category, and we can differentiate between how or what would be the approximate range for a normal individual. So these become quite important. The study of indices is quite important from the standpoint of students, from the standpoint of studying variation in mankind, which is one of the primary aim of anthropology as a subject, and it is used for identifying individual in certain cases or identifying the missing persons. If you have these shapes available with us, we can correlate the shape with a particular individual. So that is the benefit of studying these indices. And second part is, till the time a child is growing, that is up to about 18 years or so, because he's in the phase of growth. Earlier he's a child, then he's an adolescent, and he's showing increase in body size. When the body size increases, the weight increases, the height increases, the dimension of the head increases, dimension of the nose increases, dimension of the face increases. So all these dimensions are increasing, and the index value keeps on changing slightly. Now, whatever index an individual exhibits at the age of 5 years, it may not be the same when he becomes adolescent. Or whatever he's exhibiting at the time of adolescent, it may be more or less similar when he becomes adult, but in certain cases, if certain growth factors affect adversely, the index value may change for a particular individual, and he may show certain variation. So that is the prime importance of these indices, and now we'll highlight these indices one by one. The first index that is to be considered is Cephalic Index. Now, Cephalic Index is calculated as a ratio between maximum head length and maximum head breadth. Now, both these measurements have been explained in an earlier module, where head length is obtained as a maximum distance between glabella and opistocranian landmark, whereas the head breadth is taken between the two Urian points. Both these measurements are taken at right angle to each other. Now, after having the value, the formula for calculating cephalic indexes, we take head breadth as numerator, head length as denominator, and multiply by 100 and get the value of the index. The value would increase if the difference between the length and the breadth becomes minimum. If the length and the breadth show a major difference, or the difference between the two is very wide, then it would denote a long head. Now, while classifying categories individual, if we have the value which is low on the lower side, now these are the people primarily among the Negroids or the Negroes who have very, very long heads. The ones who have a medium value are the Caucasoids, and the ones who have a very rounded head are the Mongoloid people. So this is how this particular index can be calculated, and the values can be shown, and individuals could be categorized accordingly. Now the total facial index is calculated as a ratio between the total facial height and bizygomatic breadth. Both these measurements have been demonstrated in an earlier capsule. They have been shown how they are to be taken. The total facial height is obtained between Nasian point and Nathian point at the chin. The bizygomatic breadth is obtained between the two zygoan points, which denotes the breadth of the face. Now, we take into this situation, total facial height is divided by the bizygomatic breadth and is multiplied by 100. Now, the value, whatever comes after this particular calculation, is taken into consideration for categorizing the faces in a manner that if the value is very low, it would donate a long face. If the value is in between or the medium, it will donate the face is medium shaped. And if the value is very high or going close to 100 or around 95 or so, greater, it will show that the person has a very broad face, and while the least value would show that the person has a very, very narrow and a elliptical shaped face. Now these categorizations are there because they do not denote any particular population categories, but it denotes individual as a whole. These shapes are inherited from the parents by the children through the genes. They are utilized as a particular criteria for identifying individuals, looking from a distance whether the person is with a long elongated face or the person is with a rounded or a medium shaped face. If he is having a rounded face, he could be identified towards a Mongoloid person, because the Mongoloids are said to have relatively rounded heads and rounded face because their head and the face shape is relatively smaller in size. The Caucasoids have long faces, and Negroes also have long faces, so they cannot be differentiated much on the basis of the facial index, but you can identify individuals seeing from a distance whether the person is having long face or a medium shaped face. Nasal index is obtained as a ratio between the nasal height and nasal breadth. Both these measurements were taken and demonstrated in an earlier capsule, where we had taken the nasal height between the point Nasian and subnasian, and the nasal breadth as between the two LRA points which are located on the wings of the nose. Now this particular index is calculated by dividing nasal breadth by nasal height and multiplying it by 100. Now the value so arrived after the calculation would reveal whether the value of the nasal index is low, or it is medium, or it is high, going beyond about 80 or 85%. Now this particular index with a low value would reflect that the person has a narrow and long elongated nose with a very small breadth. If the value of the index is very high, it would reflect that the breadth and the height distance is very limited. The broader nose would reflect that the person belongs to a Negro category, because they are the ones who are known to have very, very broad noses. If the index value is very, very low, it is called as a Leptorini type of nose, and it is present among Caucasoid people, and majority of the Indian subgroups also have a very long and a sharp nose, starting right from Kashmir, but while we go towards the south, we find that the shape of the nose becomes relatively broad, and the index value rises. Next, we have a medium category where the nose value is between somewhere between 70 to 80. Now this value is a medium shaped nose called as a Misorini type of nose that is present in majority of the individuals who are towards the northeast region because they have relatively very small nose. And it is at times the index value is almost because the height of the nose is sufficient, whereas the breadth is not that high as compared to the caucasoids. So this value reflects the middle order and the Misorini category of the nose. Now this body mass index is that index which is calculated as a ratio between the height and the weight of an individual. Now in this case, for calculating, we take height of an individual in meters and the weight of an individual in kilograms. The formula for calculating body mass index is that we take weight in kilogram and divide it by the height of an individual in meter square. Now the value what comes after calculation, it provides us that if the value is about 18 to 25, the individual falls in a average category. If the value is less than 18, he falls under the undernourished category. And if the value goes beyond 25, the person will fall under the obese or overfed category. So this particular index is very helpful in understanding the obesity and the undernourishment in an individual. Now, looking at the children of the present day, we find that due to the intake of certain junk food, they are trying to become more and more obese. Now, obesity is taken as a disease also because it causes numerous complications in an individual, and it becomes quite apparent to identify the obese children from that of the normal children, and those who are undernourished. What is the cause of undernourishment among them? That can be identified after studying and going to a doctor and getting a right type of advice for making them normal so that they could increase their weight relatively so that they fall under the normal category of individuals. These indices which have been described just now are quite important because they can help us in understanding variation in man. They can help us in understanding the varieties of man and categorizing them into different categories. The body mass index is one of the most important index because it can help in detection whether the individual is undernourished, average, or he falls in an obese category. Similarly, the cranial index or the head index, it can help in identifying whether the person has a dolichocephalic head or a mesocephalic head or a brachycephalic head. Similarly, the nasal index can give us an idea whether the nose form is Leptorini, Misorini, or Platyrrhini type. Platyrrhini is the broadest nose, which is very much frequent in among the Negroes or the Negritos or their other variants. The facial index, which is taken, it can divide whether the individual belongs to or possesses a long face or a medium face or a broad face. So these categorizations are not only necessary from the point of view of ethnic discrimination. It is important for studying the growth of an individual. It is important for studying variation within mankind or particular population group, because no two individuals are likely to have exactly the same body dimensions. They show variation in their body dimensions, which is reflected through the indices also. These indices give us a proportion based on two different measurements. Now we take two measurements and convert it into a single proportion. So through proportion, we can understand these values or the dimensions of a body in a much better manner as compared to taking these measurements directly and then trying to show whether the head length of one individual is greater or the head breadth of the other individual is greater, and so on. Thank you.